Hi, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar. My name is Morgan Spielman. I'm an event coordinator here with Akata, and I've been working with Stacy here. I'm really excited to have her be presenting today at this webinar, Verifying Global Identities at Scale. Just so you're aware, feel free to ask questions throughout the webinar. There should be a little chat function where you're able to ask those. We'll be addressing questions at the very end. We'll also be recording this webinar, so if you miss anything, don't worry, we'll send you a copy of it as well. Please feel free to share with any colleagues who you think might find interest as well in this. We really appreciate you coming today. And again, if you have any questions, please feel free to ask Stacy. I know we'll love to answer them. So without being said, I'll go ahead and let Stacy kick it off.
Thanks, Morgan. Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me today, and thanks for joining us wherever you are in the world today. Thanks for joining us here. My name is Stacy Chen. As Morgan said, I'm a senior product marketing manager here at Akata, and I work here alongside our product and market-facing teams to really help bring the power of our core technology, the Akata Identity Engine, which powers all of our APIs and SaaS solution Pro Insight to life for our customers. Super excited here to be here and talk about how you can verify global identities at scale using our data. And so today we'll just kind of jump right in from an agenda perspective. We'll be discussing what the current fraud landscape looks like in the market, how the sophistication of fraud attacks have led to the use of emerging technologies such as machine learning and transactional patterns that can help you really assess risk, both from a high and low perspective. Of your customers and the benefits around that. And then our solutions are really key to providing companies that predictive intelligence and helping them achieve tangible outcomes. So i.e. fraud detection rates, reduced chargebacks, reduced falsely declined customers, and more. And we'll jump into that and go through kind of some kind of proven results that we've seen with some of our customers. For starters, we really wanted to invite the audience to participate in the conversation with us today. Obviously, pre-COVID, the world was becoming increasingly reliant on digital, and then post-COVID, obviously more so. So as a result, we're seeing that fraud attacks are becoming more sophisticated, fraud trends are changing, and we'd really love to hear from you as well and get a better understanding of what fraud challenges is your organization facing most today. So I'll give everyone just kind of a couple minutes to respond to that question. Looks like we still have some votes to come in, so feel free to go in and jump onto the console and vote for kind of the biggest fraud challenge that you're seeing within your org today. And I think Morgan mentioned earlier that the console is limiting the number of responses that you can provide. So if you don't see your fraud challenge on here listed, feel free to drop it in the chat or in the questions part of the console as well. Go ahead and give everyone a little bit longer to complete the response. Okay, awesome. So it looks like fake account creation, ATO, so something around kind of that account protection categories at around 29%. Transaction fraud just continues to remain kind of the largest challenge for folks. Looks like synthetic ID is also a big challenge, and then manual fraud review is a challenge as well. Interesting to see that promo loyalty abuse is kind of not a major challenge these days. So hopefully that's good and that people have eliminated that challenge within their orgs. So awesome, thank you for participating in the poll. And I think that this is pretty fairly consistent with what we see within our customer base. You know, we increasingly kind of see fake account creation and account protection, as I mentioned earlier, being a very common problem for our customers that they're trying to combat. We also do still see some promo abuse and synthetic ID, as well as specifically like account opening as well, when ride-hailing services may have an old user sign up for a new account using a fake phone number, etc. And then we're also seeing merchant onboarding becoming an increasingly common problem. Merchants are attempting to onboard onto a platform, and they may be a scam or a fake business. And then also transaction fraud, again, continues just to be a big challenge for many of our customers. And this can apply to both pre-authorization and post-authorization verification as well. And we'll kind of talk about that a little bit later. And certainly this list is not exhaustive. Our customers are seeing different kind of fraud challenges come up. This is just kind of the major set of problems that we see. And as fraudsters and their tactics, are getting more sophisticated, we've really developed our data and technology to help you verify which customers are good and which ones are bad. We do this really by focusing on kind of these 5 key identity elements that you see on the screen. So name, phone, email, address, and IP. These elements are dynamic, meaning that they change or are inputted differently by customers when they interact with your business, unlike static elements such as national identifiers, a social security number, an ID, a driver's license ID number, etc., which we often have seen kind of be associated with assessing credit risk. We're focused on fraud risk, so these kind of 5 elements are kind of key data pillars. And we refer to these elements as digital DNA because in everything that your customer does, they're leaving kind of a trace of their DNA behind. So someone can look at that information, come up with a fairly accurate picture of who your customer is, and they don't necessarily have to see them in person. And that obviously goes for your digital identity as well. So when a customer, places an order through a food delivery service or books a vacation on a travel marketplace, based on how they're using these 5 elements and inputting them kind of into the web, we can make deductions about their digital identity, about kind of how their identity elements are being used, and assess the risk behind those. So we've really built our 2 differentiated data sets around kind of these core 5 elements, again, name, phone, IP, email, and address, starting with the identity graph, which is our data set that validates digital identity elements and then how they're linked to one another using third-party identity data sourced from authoritative global data providers. So we have a data sourcing team here at Ekata that vets data providers with rigid acceptance criteria, obviously for very high accuracy, and then also making sure that they maintain security compliance with regional regulations. And so the way that the graph works is, I'll use myself as an example. So I have a name, Stacy Chen. I have an email, personal email, an address, 123 Main Street, phone number, IP address, etc. And then graph really helps validate that each of these inputs are real when I'm using them, and then also links kind of identity elements to me. So for instance, I might have 5 addresses that are linked to my name because, I've moved around a few times in the last few years. Or multiple email addresses. I might have a work email, a personal email, a junk email. And so graph really helps kind of reinforce that all those linkages are related to me, and then also maintains that information is legitimate. But in the digital world, the way that we see it is that this really only shows half the picture. As the world in these post-COVID times are relying more and more on digital goods and services these days, identity theft is only continuing to grow. Access to stolen PII is becoming increasingly prevalent, and a fraudster could very well steal my personal identifiable information and just use it across multiple transactions or businesses, and kind of see what they can get away with. Even if those details look legitimate, a business might not realize that it's not actually me. And this is why we also kind of take this 2-pronged approach and look at those same identity elements and how they're being used online to get a better understanding of the activity behind those. So in our second unique data set network, we look at how my identity elements are being used, whether that's by me or a fraudster. And so we use the network, which is made up of over 200 million monthly real-world anonymized queries to derive activity patterns to understand how my identity elements that are in our network and are hashed are actually being used in the digital world. And we'll go into some of the details around what those patterns look like in further slides. And so I just want to reiterate that, a fraudster can use my data, but they don't necessarily act like me. Anyone who's been a victim of fraud knows that fraudsters will try to use stolen data many times within a short time frame, or try to use the data at multiple merchants and see, what they can get away with again, and then maybe even use different combinations of identity elements to see if they can bypass authorizations. And so we use these two, sorry, I think we're going to jump into the next poll. And speaking of kind of transactional data, let's go ahead and jump into the poll. So does your organization leverage transactional patterns in your fraud analysis today? So I will go ahead and let Morgan kick that off. All right, we'll give everyone a few more minutes just to respond to the question. All right, so it looks like the majority of the folks on the call are using transactional patterns in your fraud analysis today. For those that are not, we'll definitely dive into a little bit deeper what those patterns that I mentioned earlier that we're looking at are. And I think that this is great. It's great to see so many companies leveraging both authoritative and then just this usage pattern data within their analysis today. So as I was saying earlier, we're using these two data sets in combination with one another to really provide a holistic set of data for your fraud risk assessment. It's important to verify the identity elements, make sure that they're linked to one another, make sure that they're legitimate, and then also analyze patterns, of how that information is getting used. And then we use that activity information to flag whether or not something looks anomalous or usage of that elements looks kind of consistent with what we've seen previously. And so together, the engine is really a combination of these two data sets and sophisticated data science that powers all this unique and predictive data that we're providing through our APIs to help you better make risk decisions about your customers and mitigate fraud risk at scale. So between these two data sets, again, we'll look at certain questions such as around the validity of elements, around, does this email belong to that person? Is the address valid? And then on the right here, we'll look at, how are those same elements being used in our network? Why are there so many different identity elements that are associated with one element? Typically I have maybe 3 emails that I use regularly. If those 3 emails are associated with 15 different IPs, that seems somewhat anomalous, especially today, given that we're not moving around very much. So that type of behavior is what we look at from a network perspective. And then again, the engine kind of combines these two data sets together to fuel all our APIs and our SaaS solution with some unique data insights. And so speaking of the data, we'll kind of look through the main categories of data points that the engine provides to our customers today. So the first of which is going to be around identity elements, which is, I'm sorry, looks like my slides got jumbled a bit here. So identity elements, so that would be name, phone, email, address, and IP. And we provide kind of the relevant identity elements from authoritative data providers to help you ensure that you have kind of the most accurate and up-to-date identity information. Aside from identity elements, we also look at match statuses. So we're leveraging kind of the linkages in our identity graph to verify that customer inputted elements are a match with one another and provide a match status. So that you know that the elements provided are actually linked to one another, and that a fraudster isn't just kind of piecing together random PII and creating a synthetic identity. So that's another category that we look at. We also look at validity checks. So to ensure kind of accuracy, we provide validity checks for each element to confirm that there is indeed like a physical endpoint at an address, or that the phone is actually a valid phone number and it can be reached, or that an email is still a deliverable. And then we also look at distance calculations. So that can also tell us kind of how far an IP might be from a primary or secondary phone or address. And these calculations can be kind of key predictors of fraud when an IP and another element shouldn't be so far apart. Again, especially during current times, we don't anticipate kind of the distance calculation to be wide in that sense. We also focus on providing really enriched metadata so that you have more insight into each element. So this can include different data points such as a line type or carrier for a phone number, whether an address is commercial or a freight forwarder, whether an email is auto-generated, and then the geolocation of an IP as well. So those are some examples of the metadata that we provide, again, built around those 5 core elements that we're focused on. And then we also apply machine learning to our data to help provide you risk scores and flags, which are derived from our models. And so we'll dive a little deeper into that today. So our confidence score is a comprehensive risk score that combines all the authoritative data that we source from our identity graph and from third-party global data providers, as well as usage patterns of elements in the network. So I like to think of confidence score as kind of a one-stop shop for a key predictor of risk that can be incorporated into both systems, rule systems, and then machine learning models as well. Network score is a risk score that we built solely on usage patterns of elements across real world queries that we're seeing in our identity network. And this is particularly helpful in situations such as account takeover, where all customer provided details, again, may look legitimate, but activity patterns can reveal to us that the information is being used an abnormal amount of times or across a high number of merchants. And then our IP risk flag also provides prediction as to whether or not an IP could be risky using enriched metadata and then some of those usage patterns that we mentioned earlier as well. And our customers find that these risk signals that we're deriving from our models are really top predictors of risk within their models. So I encourage all of you to, if you're not using them already or would like to test those signals within your fraud models, to reach out to us afterwards as well. And then lastly, our network signals will provide you an understanding of how identity elements are being used in the real world. And so we look at kind of these 4 key usage patterns, which include velocity, which is how often an element or combination of elements is used, popularity, which is how many merchants an element or combination of elements is used at, and then volatility, which is how often unique identity elements are used with one another. So an example of that might be like 15 emails that are used with one address within the last 90 days or so. And then lastly, we also look at age or kind of maturity. So when did we first see an element? When did we last see an element? And so on and so forth. And so all these data points really help our customers move the needle within their risk models and more confidently assess whether their customers are good or bad. And I mentioned earlier, our customers are focused on detecting fraud, but also identifying which customers are low risk. Knowing your customer is good can be just as valuable as knowing whether or not your customer is bad, because it can lead to results like this where you can reduce kind of the number of false declines or just improve your overall customer lifetime value, and then also potentially avoid lost revenue as a result of that. And then obviously with fraud detection, reducing chargebacks, optimizing your manual review queues, and then reducing kind of any downstream costs as a result of fraudsters is critical. And then I'll just quickly jump into this slide, just some examples of customer results that we've seen from using our data within their risk models. So you'll see kind of the variety of different problems and use cases our customers are using us for. So, you know, the first is around a multinational beverage retailer. They're able to identify false positives and then also kind of recoup that lost revenue per month, or sorry, recoup that lost revenue across each month. You'll see the value there. We also see, you know, travel marketplace that's leveraging our data to help kind of auto accept more safe orders and bookings, and that's led to an increase in total transaction value by 20%, which is great. We've also seen a payment service provider that's improving their merchant acceptance rates, so increasing acceptances by, you know, around 50%, and then reducing their chargebacks significantly as well. And then lastly, we also have a social media and technology company that's using our data with, you know, other features within their system, and you know, in one rule alone was able to catch 14% of total fraud with 87% precision, and it's very impressive that they were able to catch that within one rule alone. So very good stuff. And I think that might actually be our kind of last slide for today. I wanted to go ahead and jump into questions, and I'll give folks on the line a second to pop their questions into the chat. First of which is a great question that came up. So, how has COVID-19 impacted your data? It's a great question. Our team really did a deep dive around the impact of COVID-19 and saw that, you know, overall commerce shopping trends are up. There's a lot of new online shoppers that are emerging. Overall, increased shopping activity is actually reminiscent of holiday seasons. So from Black Friday to Christmas, we're seeing the traffic look very reminiscent to that. I think the positive note is that even though, you know, new shoppers are emerging, our data and machine learning is helping us assess that a lot of these customers are actually low risk, given that we have a fairly established data set of over 20 years. We can connect identity elements with one another and then also just verify, you know, that an IP may be low risk. So I encourage you to check out, we have I think 3-part blog series on our website around kind of this COVID-19 analysis where we dive a little deeper into the data itself. So highly recommend you check that out on our blog, and we can provide the links to that afterwards as well. We also have another question here. So do you offer a free API trial? We do. So I would recommend, I think the poll is still up. So if you would like a free trial, feel free to opt for the contact me right after the webinar option, and we'll send the trial key, or we'll get you set up to get a free trial key. Let's see, and then another question just came in kind of around what criteria we use to evaluate our data, which is a really great question. So I think we think about it kind of in 4 key themes, or a framework of kind of 4 key areas, excuse me. So one being obviously data efficacy. You know, I mentioned that a couple times during the webinar. We focus on data and features that will really maximize lift in your risk models. And, you know, for us, that's looking at how much does the data improve your AUC and precision and recall. The second is around really having a global footprint. So, you know, as our customers and as the world becomes increasingly cross-border, we want to make sure that we can support your business as it grows. So global footprint is a key component for us. The third is around response times. So this is really a key metric on the performance of our APIs, and we know that speed is obviously very critical for every business when it comes to providing a really seamless user experience or customer experience. And so we really take pride in knowing that, you know, we achieve, our APIs achieve kind of a P99s of 500 milliseconds or lower for all of our products. And then lastly, privacy and security is really the utmost importance to us. You know, we're focused on protecting customers and making sure that their identity elements aren't being, you know, exploited. And so all of our personal data is anonymized and hashed by NIST, National Institute of Standards and Technology Best Practices. And then, you know, we maintain SOC 2 Type 2 compliance, as well as GDPR and CCPA compliance within our network as well. Okay, And then another question here, is your data global? So as I mentioned earlier, we manage risk globally. So I think we have data in, I think the number is 238 countries and territories. We also have a very growing presence around the world with offices in Seattle, Amsterdam, Budapest, and Singapore. And then we have data centers in North America and Europe, and then one soon to come in APAC as well. Okay, I think that might be all the questions that we have time for today. I want to thank everyone in the audience for participating and joining the conversation. And I want to thank everyone for your time and attention today. Thank you and have a great day, everyone. Take care.